couple of explanation videos of Seamus Heaney poems. First one's called A Call. It's hard for to pick because there's so many wonderful Seamus Heaney poems on the course. Mossbawn Sunlight probably is my favourite one. I do love the variety of different poems that Heaney, that are Heaney poems that are presented on the course. Postscript is amazing poem, amazing. The Harvest Bow, his more kind of political, kind of social commentary poems like The Tolland Man and A Constable Calls, all really interesting. But A Call has to be one of the best ones. So I'm just going to give a brief explanation of it. When I finish that, I'm going to do another one called The Forge, and I'll post both of them up. Now, don't forget, if you're in my classes, it's just about getting to know the poems as well as you can, and then thinking critically. I know there's a lot of work we have to do on that critical thinking. Remember, when it comes to this subject, I suppose that idea that you can just learn things and then do well, it's just not true. You do need to accumulate knowledge, but you need to be able to use that knowledge or employ it or exploit it in a way which is thoughtful and engaged with the particulars of wording of a question. So with Heaney's a poet, right? So poetry questions always ask us about what the poet says and how the poet says it. So there are certain things you would know about Heaney. So what do we know about him? Well, he's a lyric poet in many ways, okay? So what does lyric poetry mean? So lyric poetry, his work is like, it's personal writing. Deeply personal, sorry. So Heaney often, if you did him for your junior cycle, you may have read Digging. You may have read Midterm Break. His father features in both of those poems. You may have read When All the Others Are Away at Mass. That was about his mother. You'll know that Heaney's poetry is often inspired by his family and his family relationships. And there is no question whatsoever that those relationships were formative for Heaney, and that's why he writes about them with such I was going to say passion. I never associate the word passion with Heaney. Meaning, I suppose. And this is a poem about his dad. And it is so typical of Heaney's style because it's a narrative poem. It features characterization. And there's an apparent simplicity. But underlying that simplicity is a real complexity, both in terms of style and in terms of the kind of philosophical observations being made, thematic observations being made by the poet. So in other words, it's just really thought-provoking. And again, at the heart of Heaney, you have symbols. Now I know that's a really trite thing to say, and quite a obvious thing to say about Heaney's poetry being built around symbolism. Because show me a poet and I'll show you a poet whose work is where symbolism plays an important role. Think about Paul Meehan and the tennis court image. It's brilliant. In Hearth Lesson, or even the name of that poem, Hearth Lesson. Think about Yeats and The Wild Swans Are Cool. Think about Hopkins. There's so many in The Windhover. There's so many to choose from. But symbolism, if I was studying for my leaving cert and I was trying to, try to get the core of preparing a poet, just think about the symbols that they use. And this poem, at the core of it, is this symbol of ticking clocks. I'll read it really quickly. Begins with a piece of dialogue. Dialogue is, it's such a difficult thing to write effectively, and it just brings characters to life. And if you're a narrative poet, characterization lies at the core of what you're doing. Hold on, she said. I'll just run out and get him. Look at the simplicity of the language. The first line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 words, 11 syllables. It's monosyllabic. You know, accessible. And he's doing that thing that all, I mean, I've trying to teach people the fundamentals of different genres of writing. One of the genres you're supposed to prepare for your Leaving Cert is narrative writing. And I always thought, make the opening engaging, create a sense of curiosity. Who's she? Who is she running out to get? We have questions. We're drawn in. It's what good storytellers do. It's like the beginning of A Constable Calls when, you know, there's a bicycle. And we don't, it's described in this kind of, you know, forensic detail. We don't know whose bicycle it is, but we want to know whose. You know, or in the first line of postscript, and sometime make the time. You know, to drive out west. You go, okay, why? And starting with the, you know, the conjunction and, in the same way as starting off with the, you know, hold on. So obviously this is in the middle of a conversation. We're drawn straight in. Anyway, I'm overcomplicating it. The weather here is so good, he took the chance to do a bit of weeding. So there's a piece of information he's told. He's ringing his dad. His sister answers the phone, or somebody answers the phone. A woman answers the phone. And she said, the dad's out in the garden. And as soon as he hears that, he forms this image in his mind of his dad. So I saw him down on his hands and knees beside the leak rig. Just a piece of garden equipment. Touching, inspecting, separating one stalk from the other, gently pulling up everything not tapered, frail and leafless. Pleased to feel each little weed root break, but rueful also. It's one of those, you know, really meticulous piece of characterization, character description that you see in Heaney's work. And all of this apparently incidental details. Remember what I told you incidental detail is? I'm always, by the way, I know a lot of people watch these videos who aren't in my class. Sorry, I made a mistake there. There we go. So I kind of say things and go, oh shit, I should have explained that to the kind of wider, you know, students watching this who aren't in my class. Incidental details, those little details that on their own don't appear to be important, like the fact that he was touching and separating the stalks, that you know, he was pulling up everything gently. That's, you know, that adverb verb combination, gently pulling up everything not tapered, frail and leafless. And the triadic structure of tapered, frail and leafless. The juxtaposition of pleased and rueful. By the way, I haven't highlighted that in here yet because, you know, it's not the important lines. We haven't got to the important part of the poem yet. But don't forget, if I highlight something in yellow, I think it's worth learning. So all those little details, they're all like the stroke of a paintbrush on a canvas. They're all making the image clearer, adding a vivid quality. And they're all emblematic of his love for his dad in the same way as and don't forget, you have to think about these poems not as separate units. They are, of course, separate units, but when you're writing about them in your Leaving Cert, you need to write about the body of his work, 4 or 5 poems together. So think about this along with Moss-Spawn Sunlight and the description of his aunt with the, you know, her flowery fingernails and, her flowery apron, her whitened fingernails and her measling shins. All of these things combine to create a vivid image, and we ask ourselves, why is he describing the father in such great detail here? Why is the memory evoked in such great detail? And of course, the memory is evoked in such great detail because he loves this man. It's his dad. And he misses him. He doesn't live with him anymore. He's a grown man. And that's why you have this image of life and death, the garden growing, but also the flowers that are not prospering or being weeded, pulled up. And there's a sense of enjoyment of life. That's where pleased. And then rueful. Rueful means regretful or sad. And that's kind of what life is like, isn't it? We have people in our lives that we love. We have people in our lives that we value. But we will lose those people. That is a reality of life. The image of a garden being weeded, of things being removed. Those are very powerful images. And then we get to the symbolism of the poem. And the second half of the poem is extraordinarily good. So this image of him waiting at the other end of a phone. And as he's waiting, he can hear the sounds of the hallway in his father's house. And he says, I found myself listening to the amplified grave ticking of hall clocks. You learn that. The ticking of clocks. Ticking. It's a motif in his work. That idea of ticking. Don't forget what I told you motif is. By the way, if you're not in my class and you're looking for notes, pmcbrunner@iCloud. Now, there is a charge. I want to make that clear. It's not very much for the amount of stuff you'll be getting, but if you're looking for stuff, if you're looking for notes, explanations of this stuff, pmcbrunner@iCloud. Listening to the amplified grave ticking. Now, grave there means serious. And it's this image of there's clocks in the hall. But then this grave brings up images of death. And ticking, that onomatopoeic ticking, that striking use of that word, which stimulates our aural sense. That brings up images of the passage of time. Something which Heaney is so powerfully aware of in, The Underground, in Holland Man, in A Constable Calls, and ticking. The ticking clock features in Mossbawn Sunlight. It features the sound of ticking. The bicycle ticked, ticked, ticked features in A Constable Calls. And it's just he's listening to the passage of time as he sits there waiting for his dad to come to the phone. It's brilliant. Where the phone lay unattended in a calm of mirror, glass and sun-struck pendulums. Isn't that gorgeously vivid visual image? We can kind of see the hall. Big grandfather clocks in the hall and the glass covers and the pendulums going from side to side. Very vivid, kind of cinematic setting description. And everything slow, everything thoughtful, everything vivid. And found myself then thinking, if it were nowadays, and this is the great line in the poem, this is how death would summon every man. Great line. Not the best line in the poem. The best line in the poem is yet to come. But that is what we call a literary allusion. Heaney was a very, very, very educated man, very interested in literature and the history of literature. And he was aware of, those medieval morality plays where you'd have the figure of death, like the Grim Reaper, that idea. And every man was just this kind of dramatization of, a human being. And often these plays showed the moment when death was coming, and is your soul cleansed? Are you ready for that moment? And Heaney's referring to that, and he's referring to the kind of universal nature of our lives. Our lives, have family. We have our particular interests. In this case, it's gardening. We have our relationships. Here it's with the son and the father. And then death comes. The clock never stops ticking. Pendulum never stops swinging, and then death comes, and there's no sadness in that here. There's no sense of despair. It's not like the wonderful poem by W.H. Auden, Stop All the Clocks. It's not a poem about grief. It's a poem about love, and it's a poem about the awareness that the time passes. And I suppose, like so many Heaney poems, it's a poem of appreciation of a person in his life. And he hits us with in the end, this honesty. We talk about personal writing, paying attention to detail, using anecdotes to explore ideas. Using aesthetic flourishes to make the writing more interesting, addressing themes which are deeply personal but also relatable. And then you get a line like this from Heaney: "Next thing he spoke, and I nearly said I loved him." 11 words and 12 syllables. And just that word there. See that word there? It's just fantastic. Does he love his dad? Yeah. Does he miss him? Because this is a memory. The father has passed away as he writes this poem. Does he miss him? Yeah, he does miss him. He misses him a lot. But that barrier, that emotional barrier sometimes exists between generations. That barrier is insurmountable. And it would be strange for him to say, by the way, Dad, I love you. Can't do it. But doesn't mean he doesn't love him. And when we think about the words pleased and rueful up here, and we look at that last line, it's dramatic and it's very, very, very thought-provoking. So don't forget, when you're writing about Heaney, you're never going to write a summary of this poem, but you're going to be, if the wording of the question is nice, it's going to ask you to talk about why the themes that he addresses are in some way interesting or challenging. And challenging means, thought-provoking, or even forces us to think about things that are maybe uncomfortable. When we think about those things, those aspects of Heaney's poetry, this is a great poem to write about. And we think about the use of imagery. It's a narrative poem. He relates an anecdote about a phone call he made to his dad. There's the attention to incidental detail, all these little things that, you're not going to learn them, but they are of significance. The use of, juxtaposition as a technique. The ability to, carve craft a really interesting and engaging opening sequence. The use of onomatopoeia, the setting description, the richness of those literary allusions, the apparent simplicity married to the, reality of complexity. It's just a brilliant, brilliant poem. I love it. And if Heaney comes up and the question is nice, he's a great poet to write about. But that's why you have to do with all your poets, guys. You have to be thinking about, okay, what is each poem about? What's the theme? And then more importantly, what do I know about the techniques employed by the poet to deliver that theme in an interesting way? And how are they connected to the other poems? I'm going to do loads of this stuff now. I'm determined to do as much of this kind of online little tutorials as I can. Okay, so don't forget PMC Brunner at iCloud if you're looking for something in terms of notes. And sure, hope that was useful.